Hello friends, and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start as usual with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, hello everyone and welcome. Today we continue reading the Ghatikara Sutta. This is Majjhima Nikaya number 81. Last time we already started reading this sutta. And so last time we read the first half. The first half is the story of Jyotipala and of course Ghatikara, but especially Jyotipala. Jyotipala is a friend of Ghatikara, as you remember. And both of them lived at the time of Kassapa Buddha, so the Buddha before our Buddha, before Gautama Buddha or Shakyamuni Buddha. And so Ghatikara was a potter and he was a very, very strong supporter of the Buddha, also a very good practitioner himself. And he had this friend, Jyotipala, who was a Brahmin and who was very much opposed to even meeting the Buddha or listening to the Buddha's teaching. But then Ghatikara used various skillful means to get Jyotipala to meet the Buddha, and eventually Jyotipala was so touched and so amazed and so convinced by this meeting with the Buddha that he immediately decided to become a monk. And so he gave up his former life and he immediately ordained with the Buddha. And then he asked Ghatikara why Ghatikara himself, being such a strong supporter and such a strong practitioner himself, didn't ordain. And so Ghatikara said he has his old parents and they are blind, and so he needs to look after them. And so the second half of this sutta, which we're going to read today, is about Ghatikara himself. Being such a strong practitioner, probably if his situation had been different, he probably would have become a monk, but he couldn't. He had to stay as a layperson to support his parents. So we're going to look at the way he organized his life, the way he practiced, the way he supported his parents, the way he earned his money, just the way he structured his daily life, while at the same time also practicing Dhamma and supporting the Buddhist community. So I think this sutta is very, very inspirational, especially for many people out there who maybe want to practice Dhamma in their daily life, even thinking about ordaining, but for some reason or other don't have the possibility to ordain. So we can all look at Ghatikara and then get a little bit inspiration from his lifestyle and from his situation. So it's not just nowadays that people want to ordain, but for some reason can't. Even in the Buddha's time and even in past Buddha's times, people encountered the same situation and just try to make the best of it. So this is what today's sutta is about. So let's continue reading. I have put a link in the live chat to Bhante Sujato's translation. And as last time, I will be reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. So we start at paragraph 13. This is where we left off last time, when the friend Jyotipala, the Brahmin, just got ordained as a monk. And then the story picks up again. Then, not long after Jyotipala, the Brahmin student, had received the full admission, so the full ordination, a half-month after he had received the full admission, the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, having stayed at Vimalanyani as long as he chose, set out to wander towards Benares, Wandering by stages, he eventually arrived at Benares, and there he went to live in the deer park at Isipatana. Now King Kiki of Kasi heard, it seems that the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, has reached Benares and is living in the deer park at Isipatana. So he had a number of state carriages made ready, and mounting a state carriage, drove out from Benares with the full pomp of royalty in order to see the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened. He went thus as far as the road was passable for carriages, and then he got down from his carriage and went forward on foot to the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened. After paying homage to him, he sat down at one side, and the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, instructed, urged, roused, and gladdened King Kiki of Kasi with an exposition of the Dhamma. So here we have the Buddha Kassapa. He is now leaving the town of Jyotipala and Ghatikara. The town was called Vepalinga, and he is wandering to Benares. And Benares, of course, is the capital city of the kingdom of Kasi. And both in Kassapa Buddha's time and also in Gautama Buddha's time, Kasi, or Benares especially, was the capital city of luxury goods. So whatever luxury goods there were in ancient India, it seems that they were all produced in Benares or in the kingdom of Kasi. So, for example, in the suttas, we often hear of Kasi cloth. That was the most expensive, most exquisite, most superior kind of cloth. Or we hear of sandalwood that comes from Kasi. So that was the most expensive kind of wood. In the form of powder, it was used for makeup and for perfumes because sandalwood smells very nice. It was also used for making special kinds of furniture, like chests and drawers and cabinets and stuff, to keep your clothes in, because if you keep your clothes in those kind of furniture, then it will take on a very nice smell. So Kasi basically was the symbol of luxury and of wealth. And so King Kiki obviously is the king of that place, so he must have been a very wealthy king. And King Kiki is very, very famous. He became very popular in later Buddhist literature, not in the early Buddhist texts. In the early Buddhist texts, he appears from time to time, not very often. This is actually the most detailed sutta about him that we have. But in later Buddhist literature, he became very popular, and also stories about the time of Kassapa Buddha became very popular. And probably the inspiration for all those stories is drawn from this sutta, the Ghatikara Sutta, because this sutta is just such a cute and inspirational and just sutta that it really touches your heart because it's such a sweet story. And so, for example, the most famous story of King Kiki's time or Kassapa Buddha's time that was popular in later literature in all Buddhist schools, not only in the Pali school, also in the Chinese schools and so on, the Tibetan schools, was the story of King Kiki's daughters, the 7 sisters or the 7 daughters, or sometimes also called the 7 princesses. Those are 7 of the daughters of King Kiki. King Kiki had more than 7 daughters, but those 7 especially became very famous because this story was spread all over, because it's a very inspirational story also about 7 princesses, his daughters, and they were all very, very strong practitioners following the Buddha's teaching, Kassapa Buddha's teaching, obviously. And so but because they were princesses, they were always stuck in the palace, and they really wanted to go out to the charnel ground and do those cemetery contemplations, those corpse contemplations. And so they asked their father, King Kiki, for permission, and obviously the father didn't allow it. And eventually, after a lot of nagging, he finally relented and let them go. And so they go to this charnel ground, all those princesses in the full pomp of royalty with their carriages go to this charnel ground, try to spend the night there. And then one of the gods appears, King Saka, the god king of the heaven of the 33, appears, because he also is very inspired by those princesses that can let go of the luxury and go to the charnel ground to practice the Buddha's teaching, and especially in this hardcore way of doing like corpse contemplations. And so King Sakka is very inspired, and he says, I will grant you a wish, ask me whatever you like. And so the princesses say, well, please make us arahants. And then he says, I'm actually not able to grant you that kind of wish. You should ask me for some kind of material thing, and then I will grant you that. And obviously the princesses, being very strong Dharma practitioners, say, well, your wish granting is entirely worthless then, because we're not interested in any kind of material thing. And so they put him down quite a bit and kind of tell him that he's the God King, so he thinks that he is very powerful, but they tell him that nothing that he can give them is actually in any way useful to them, and that he's entirely powerless when it comes to the things that really matter. So they give him a Dhamma talk, and eventually King Sakka was trying to benefit them, but it ends up that they are benefiting King Sakka by giving him this Dhamma talk. And then there's a story about another daughter of King. Oh, by the way, those 7 daughters, then they don't become enlightened, but they all become very, very famous bhikkhunis in our Buddha's time, Gautama Buddha's time. That is why these stories are so popular, because it connects 7 of the most famous bhikkhunis from our time with King Kiki's time, and says that they were all sisters previously and they all practiced together. And so now they all became arahants together. So those famous bhikkhunis like Kema, like Upalavana, Dhammadina, Kisa Gotami Patachara, and so on, and the laywoman Visakha, all of them supposedly were sisters in King Kiki's time, and princesses, daughters of King Kiki. And King Kiki had another daughter. She really, really wanted to become a bhikkhuni, but again, King Kiki didn't allow it, and he married her off to some random guy. Then it turned out that actually the guy agreed to let her go forth, and so she just agreed to the marriage as a means to be able to go forth and become a bhikkhuni. So that's also a very interesting story, how a woman purposely chose to get married in order to be able to go forth. And she did become an arahant and accomplished the training, became fully enlightened. And many, many other stories about King Kiki's son, who then became Rahula, the Buddha's son in our Buddha's time, and the King Kiki's general, who became another famous bhikkhu. And so there's just a really, really big amount of stories about King Kiki's time in later Buddhist literature, because people were so much fascinated with, I think, Kassapa Buddha's time, because Kassapa Buddha's time obviously is the closest Buddha to our Buddha, Gautama Buddha. So everybody who had a strong practice in Kassapa Buddha's time would have again reconnected with Gautama Buddha, because that is the closest opportunity to again practice Dhamma. So later Buddhist literature was very, very fascinated by King Kiki, and I think especially inspired by this sutta, the Ghatikara Sutta. Anyway, let's read on with this sutta, and otherwise we don't have enough time. So King Kiki goes to the Buddha Kassapa, and here's a Dhamma talk. And then at the conclusion of the exposition, King Kiki of Kasi said, "Venerable Sir, let the Blessed One, together with the Sangha of bhikkhus, consent to accept tomorrow's meal from me." And the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, accepted in silence. Then, knowing that the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, had accepted, he rose from his seat, and after paying homage to him, keeping him on his right, he departed. Then, when the night had ended, King Kiki of Kasi had good food of various kinds prepared in his own dwelling, red rice stored in the sheaf, with the dark grains picked out, along with many sauces and curries. And he had the time announced to the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, thus: "It is time, Venerable Sir, the meal is ready." So King Kiki of Kasi is very happy with the Dhamma talk, and he invites the Buddha and the Sangha for a meal. Then, it being morning, the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, dressed, and taking his bowl and outer robe, he went with the Sangha of bhikkhus to the dwelling of King Kiki of Kasi, and sat down on the seat made ready. Then, with his own hands, King Kiki of Kasi served and satisfied the Sangha of bhikkhus, headed by the Buddha, with the various kinds of good food. When the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, had eaten and had put his bowl aside, King Kiki of Kasi took a low seat, sat down at one side and said, "Venerable Sir, let the Blessed One accept from me a residence for the rains in Benares. There will be such service to the Sangha." And the Buddha says, "Enough, King, my residence for the rains has already been provided for." A second and a third time, King Kiki of Kasi said, "Venerable Sir, let the Blessed One accept from me a residence for the rains in Benares. That will be helpful for the Sangha." And the Buddha again says, "Enough, King, my residence for the rains has already been provided for." So King Kiki of Kasi has heard a Dhamma talk from the Buddha. He was quite happy about it, but we notice he doesn't go for refuge. He doesn't take the 5 precepts. He doesn't say that he is becoming a lay follower. So it seems that he was not ready to actually take the Dhamma on board and to actually do some practice. He just liked to listen to the talk, found it very inspiring, and then decided to make some merit, which is also good, but not quite as good as actually starting to practice yourself. So he decided to make some merit and invited the Sangha, the Buddha and the Sangha, for a meal. And after he had actually provided the meal, again, he doesn't ask for a Dhamma talk from the Buddha, as is normally the case. So usually in the suttas, when somebody invites the Sangha for a meal, after the meal, the Sangha will give a Dhamma talk, or if the Buddha is present, then the Buddha himself will give the Dhamma talk. But in this case, King Kiki does not ask for a Dhamma talk. He just wants to make more merit. Again, that's not a bad thing. That's a very beautiful mind state. But again, we see that he's not that much interested in actually understanding the Dhamma deeply. But he asked for the opportunity to offer a residence for the rains in Benares. So he wants the Sangha to spend more time there. Obviously, the rains retreat is a 3-month period where people, Sangha, like the monastics, monks and nuns, stay in one place and they don't travel around. So for 9 months of the year, the Sangha would have been wandering around from place to place, not staying for too long in one location. And for 3 months, when it is raining heavily every day and when it's really inconvenient to travel, then the Sangha would have stayed in one single place. And so obviously, if you can offer a residence for the rains for a person, that is considered to be very, very meritorious, because for 3 months, you have the opportunity every single day to make merit by offering whatever the Sangha needs. And also, obviously, you have the opportunity to practice Dhamma with them, to ask a lot of Dhamma questions if you have any, also to hear a lot of Dhamma talks. And just when monks and nuns are around, obviously, usually there's a little bit of peer pressure to do your own practice. So you feel a little bit more motivated to actually sit down and meditate or do some wholesome activities. So it's considered very, very meritorious to be able to support somebody for the rains. Even in modern times, in Asian countries, it's quite common for people to invite a monk or a nun and support them for the rains. Sometimes people have like properties with a few kutis on them, like that means some kind of small bungalows where monks and nuns can live. And so they would be invited to come for the rains and spend 3 months there. And the lay people who own the property would provide the food and the robes and whatever other necessities there are. So that is still practiced in modern times. And obviously, King Kiki of Kasi was very rich. So he had the opportunity to invite the Buddha and the entire Sangha to stay for 3 months. So obviously that would have been expensive, and especially because he wants to provide the superior food, since he said, I will offer this kind of service every single day to the Sangha, the kind that he prepared for this meal. So obviously that was superior food, very good food, and that would have been expensive. So he is offering like the luxuries of Kasi. As I mentioned, Kasi was the capital of, or the country of luxury, and he's offering all that to the Sangha. And even though he's offering the most luxurious kinds of things that existed in the ancient world or in ancient India, the Buddha says no, and he requested for 3 times, and 3 times the Buddha rejects him. So basically he has offered the most superior kind of sensual things, or the most superior kinds of material goods that are available in the time of Kassapa Buddha, and still Kassapa Buddha has said no to him. And He says somebody else has already invited them. Enough, king, my residence for the rains has already been provided for. The king thought, the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, does not accept from me a residence for the rains in Benares. And he was very disappointed and sad. Then he said, Venerable sir, have you a better supporter than I am? I have, great king. So the king obviously is very disappointed, very sad. He also feels rejected. Obviously, he is probably the most powerful king of the most wealthy country in the time. And he is offering whatever material pleasure there is in this human realm to the Sangha. And so he thinks obviously his offering is the most superior offering that anybody can give in the human realm. So he feels very disappointed to be rejected because, as we all know, it's never nice to be rejected. And obviously, as a king, probably he doesn't experience that sensation very often. It doesn't happen that often that a king is rejected or has to hear the word no. So probably he was quite displeased at this point. And then he asked, is there somebody who is actually better than me? Do you have a better supporter? And I think for him, it must have been quite difficult to imagine that there could be something better than the offering that he was making. But the Buddha says, I have a better supporter. And then the Buddha says, there is a market town called Vimalanyani where a potter named Ghatikara lives. He is my supporter, my chief supporter. Now you, great king, thought, the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, does not accept from me a residence for the rains in Benares. And you are very disappointed and sad. But the potter Ghatikara is not and will not be so. So the Buddha says, I do have a better supporter than the richest king in this realm. And my better supporter is actually a potter. And as we talked about last time, potters were considered to be quite low in the social hierarchy. In the caste system of India, that was considered very, very low caste. And so the Buddha says, but actually there's a potter and he's better than you are, great king. And he says, well, great king, when I rejected you, you were very disappointed and sad, but the potter, Ghatikara, would never have this kind of emotion. He would never feel disappointed and sad. So basically, even if the Buddha had rejected the potter and had said to him, well, I'm not coming for the rains, the potter doesn't feel disappointed and sad. Why? Because as we will see in a minute, the potter Ghatikara is actually a very, very strong practitioner, and he has reached the state of non-return, anagamiship. And obviously, once you reach the state of anagamiship, then you have let go of all attachment to the sensual realm. That means all attachment to sensual pleasures, sensual desires, but also all states of anger, of negativity, of hatred, but also of sadness, of fear, and of those kind of emotions. So those kind of mind states cannot arise anymore once you have reached the stage of non-return. Those fetters in the mind have been cut, those defilements have been removed. These kind of thoughts or these kind of emotions cannot arise anymore in the mind of such a person. So maybe Ghatikara the potter isn't quite as wealthy as the richest king, and maybe his social standing isn't quite as high, but he is much better in terms of Dhamma practice, much better in terms of commitment to the practice, and also in terms of mental development. So he's not just committed, but he has actually made really big progress on the path. And so obviously in terms of those things that are actually important, which is Dhamma practice, which is development of the mind, which is purification of the mind, and actually cutting off fetters, obviously the potter Ghatikara is a lot more advanced than King Kiki of Kasi. So, and now there is a very inspiring description of the potter Ghatikara. So the Buddha says, the potter Ghatikara has gone for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. He abstains from killing living beings, from taking what is not given, from misconduct in sensual pleasures, from false speech, and from wine, liquor, and intoxicants, which are the basis of negligence. So as a first step, Ghatikara has gone for refuge to the triple gem. So he has become a Buddhist. This is the very first step. Becoming a Buddhist, taking refuge. We see that in so many suttas where people hear Dhamma talk, and at the end they say, oh, we'll go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. We'll become lay followers. So this is the first initial commitment to the practice. Obviously, he has done that, and he has gone a step further and has decided to also observe Sila, the 5 precepts. So he is keeping the 5 precepts. Obviously, that is great, and that is already more than King Kiki of Kasi has done. But it continues. He has unwavering confidence in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and he possesses the virtues loved by the noble ones. So this is a description for stream entry. So an alternative way of expressing that Ghatikara is a stream enterer. So the first stage of the 4 stages of the Aryas, the noble people. He has unwavering confidence in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So whatever happens, he will never leave the Dhamma practice behind anymore. He will never give up his practice. He is really fixed on the Noble Eightfold Path. And when you're fixed on the Noble Eightfold Path, obviously you're going to go straight to Nibbana. So whatever happens, you're not going to fall off the path again. You're not going to forget your practice. You're not going to do some other kind of spiritual practice or just get involved in sense pleasures and live a heedless life and keep on just wandering around in samsara. But once you're fixed on the Noble Eightfold Path, obviously the path leads straight to Nibbana. So once you're fixed on there, you're guaranteed to reach Nibbana. That means even if you pass away and you're reborn somewhere else, you will be reborn in a place where you can actually practice, where you can reconnect with the Dhamma, because that karmic seed inside you that drives you towards the Dhamma is so strong in a stream enterer that this cannot be lost again. The Dhamma cannot be lost again, even if you die. And of course, he possesses the virtues loved by the noble ones. That means he is really strong in the 5 precepts. And he doesn't kill any being anymore or breaks any of the precepts deliberately. And then he's free from doubt about suffering, about the origin of suffering, about the cessation of suffering, and about the way leading to the cessation of suffering. So that is, again, another description of stream entry. He is free from doubt, especially doubt about the practice, doubt about the Dhamma. So obviously that is one of the fetters that is cut at stream entry, which is doubt. And he fully understands the 4 noble truths: suffering, the origin, the cessation, and the way. So obviously that is another expression of saying he fully understands the Dhamma, he fully understands the Buddha's teaching. And for that reason, he has unwavering confidence because he fully understands and because he has no more doubt. So all of these are various descriptions of him being a stream enterer. Then the text continues, he eats only 1 meal a day. He observes celibacy, his virtues of good character. So his practice doesn't stop at just keeping the 5 precepts. He has gone a lot further than that. He has made a lot deeper commitments. He has taken on some practices that monastics keep. So even though he cannot become a monk, he's trying to have a lifestyle that is in some ways similar to that of a monk. So he eats only 1 meal a day, which means, again, he's not at all attached to sense pleasures. He eats very much in moderation, just enough to keep the body going, not to enjoy the various tastes and flavors and smells and so on, and just have a good social life and hang out with crowds of people and eat together and be happy and merry. But he is very restricted because he lives a very calm and simple and mindful life. And obviously he also observes celibacy. Again, because he is not attached to any sense pleasures, because he is already a non-returner. He has left the sensual realm behind. Then he has laid aside gems and gold. He has given up gold and silver, or gold and money. So obviously, since he is no longer attached to any material object, he is also not interested whatsoever in various gems, because there's no purpose in them other than making you beautiful or amassing wealth. But obviously he's not interested in amassing wealth, because with wealth you can buy sensual pleasures, and he's not interested in that. And he has also completely let go of gold and silver, or gold and money. Again, that is a practice that is not very typical for lay people. That is a lot more typical for monastics, and it's also very difficult to do for lay people, because obviously he still has to support his own life and the life of his parents with some kind of economic activity, some kind of work. So it's difficult to do, but he is so committed that he has somehow made it work. Then he does not dig the ground for clay with a pick or with his own hands. So obviously he's a potter, so he needs clay to make his pots, but he does not dig the ground. He doesn't dig up the clay. Again, that is a rule for monastics. Monastics are not allowed to dig the ground. And it seems that this is a rule that he has taken on, probably in order so that he doesn't harm the small beings that are in the earth, like worms or insects and so on. So he doesn't do that. What has broken off riverbanks or is thrown up by rats, he brings home in a carrier. So the way he gets his clay is when the clay is just lying openly around because it has been broken off riverbanks or has been dug up by some kind of animals, when they make a burrow or when they make those underground tunnels or whatever. When he has made a pot, he says, "Let anyone who likes set down some selected rice or selected beans or selected lentils, and let him take away whatever he likes." So the way he actually sustains his life and the way he actually does business is not with money, but it's some kind of bartering system where he just puts his pot out there, and then if people want to have a pot, they would just leave some kind of food there in exchange. And it seems that he doesn't even set a price. He doesn't even say, like, this pot is worth like 3 bags of rice or 5 bags of lentils or whatever. He just puts the pot there, and then he leaves it up to the people to pay whatever they think this is worth. So obviously that puts a lot of trust in people, that they will be honest and will not try to trick him. So that is a very courageous way of living his life. And obviously, that's not really possible in the modern times. Obviously, life was much simpler back then. People built their own houses. Often people made their own clothes. People often grew their own food. So if you have this kind of very simple lifestyle and this kind of very simple economy, you can still try to make this work. This would have been unusual even for his time, but you can still make it work. In modern times, would be very difficult to live exactly like Ghatikara the potter, because our lives are just so much more complex. It's very difficult nowadays to build your own house. You need so many materials, and everything is so complex, and you need to buy taxes, and you need to pay for your health insurance, and you just have so many random expenses all the time that it's not really possible to live without money. But well, we're kind of unlucky that we live in this really complicated age. Back then, it was much simpler, and so Ghatikara the potter could make this work. And then he supports his blind and aged parents, so he's looking after his parents. This is, again, a practice of compassion, obviously, and a practice of gratitude, because parents raise us up when we are small, and then when they need help, then we look after them. So he gave up his own wish of becoming a monk in order to show gratitude and compassion to his parents who really need him because they are blind. And then, having destroyed the 5 lower fetters, he is one who will reappear spontaneously in the pure abodes and there attain final nibbana without ever returning from that world. So this obviously is the stock passage for somebody who has become a non-returner. Non-returners is the stage just below arahantship, so not quite fully enlightened yet, but very close, who has already destroyed 5 of the 10 fetters, and who will not be reborn again in the sensual plane, that is our plane, but will be reborn in what is called the pure abodes. This is a state of rebirth, or a stage of rebirth on the plane of the 4th jhana, so a very pleasant rebirth. And there they will become arahants and then pass into parinibbana from there. So that is how the potter Ghatikara lives. Very inspirational. So for those of us who want to become monastics but can't quite, or for those of us who just want to take their practice up a notch, intensify the practice a little bit, we can see if we can implement some of these ideas here. And then let's read on and see what else the sutta has to say about Ghatikara. On one occasion, when I was living at Vimalanyani, it being morning, I dressed, and taking my bowl and outer robe, I went to the potter Ghatikara's parents and asked them, "Where has the potter gone, please? Venerable sir, your supporter has gone out, but take rice from the cauldron and sauce from the saucepan and eat." I did so and went away. Then the potter Ghatikara went to his parents and asked, "Who has taken rice from the cauldron and sauce from the saucepan, eaten and gone away?" "My dear, the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, did." Then the potter Ghatikara thought, "It is a gain for me, it is a great gain for me, that the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, has so much trust in me." And rapture and happiness never left him for a half month, or his parents for a week. So there was one occasion, Buddha Kassapa was an alms round. Obviously, he goes from house to house and he passes by the house of the potter. And he notices that the potter isn't there to offer any kind of food. And probably that would have been quite unusual because, as we have heard, the potter was his chief supporter. So he goes into the house and he learns that the potter isn't there, only the blind parents. So the blind parents obviously can't offer food because they can't see anything. So the blind parents just tell him, "Oh, just go to the kitchen and help yourself, take whatever you like." And so the Buddha actually walks into the kitchen and takes all the food, or takes as much as he likes, and then basically just serves himself as though it was his own home, and then he leaves again. And then Ghatikara learns about this, and he is so happy that the happiness and rapture don't leave him for 2 weeks. So he's totally blissed out for 2 weeks when he hears that Buddha Kassapa just walked into his house as though it was his own house and just helped himself to all the food that was there. So as Ghatikara then says, it is a gain for me that the Buddha has so much trust in me. So the Buddha knows that Ghatikara won't mind. The Buddha trusts Ghatikara to be very generous and to be very happy to give whatever he has. So the Buddha doesn't worry about taking too much or taking away all the food or whatever. He knows that Ghatikara would want to offer everything that is there. Even though Ghatikara isn't personally there to encourage him, the Buddha knows his character, and the Buddha knows that he is very generous. And so Ghatikara is very overjoyed that the Buddha thinks or trusts him, that the Buddha trusts him, and that the Buddha thinks that he has all these good qualities and won't mind the Buddha just walking in and taking stuff. So again, we can think about ourselves. How would we feel if we are not home and some random monk or nun walks down the street and walks into our house, takes stuff from our pantry or from our pots and pans, and then leaves, and we come home and there's no food in the house? Would we actually feel happy that a monk or nun trusted us enough to randomly walk in our house and take stuff from there? Or would we feel annoyed that somebody has intruded and has taken our food and now we have to cook again, or now we have to go shopping again? So would we feel that they have encroached on us, or would we actually feel happy that this happened? So we can check ourselves if we are that generous and if we are that happy to support others in the practice, or if there is maybe some kind of mixed emotions there if we come home and we find out somebody has just walked in and taken stuff from us. So, and then the text continues, a very similar occasion. On another occasion, when I was living at Vimalanyani, it being morning, I dressed, and taking my bowl and outer robe, I went to the potter Ghatikara's parents and asked them, "Where has the potter gone, please?" "Venerable sir, your supporter has gone out, but take some porridge from the vessel and sauce from the saucepan and eat." I did so and went away. Then the potter Ghatikara went to his parents and asked, "Who has taken porridge from the vessel and sauce from the saucepan, eaten and gone away?" "My dear, the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, did." Then the potter Ghatikara thought, "It is a gain for me, it is a great gain for me, that the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, has so much trust in me. And rapture and happiness never left him for a half month, or his parents for a week. So this is basically a very similar occasion. So this hasn't just happened once. It happened many times. And each and every single time, Ghatikara was just so happy, and he never felt that the Buddha was taking too much. He was just overjoyed, just completely blissed out that the Buddha just walked in and took stuff. On another occasion, when I was living at Vimalanyani, my hut leaked. Then I addressed the bhikkhus thus: "Go, bhikkhus, and find out if there's any grass at the potter Ghatikara's house." So there is a leak in the Buddha's hut, in the roof, and obviously the roof was covered with grass. So it was kind of a grass, kind of like roof tiles, but made out of grass. And so obviously if you want to repair the leak, you need grass. So he sends them to Ghatikara. "Venerable sir, there is no grass at the potter Ghatikara's house. There is the grass thatch over his workshop. Go, bhikkhus, and remove the grass from the potter Ghatikara's workshop." They did so. Then the potter Ghatikara's parents asked the bhikkhus, "Who is removing the grass from the workshop?" "Sister, the hut of the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, is leaking." "Take it, venerable sirs, take it, dear ones." Then the potter Ghatikara went to his parents and asked, "Who has removed the grass from the workshop?" The bhikkhus did, "My dear, the hut of the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, is leaking." Then the potter Ghatikara thought, "It is a gain for me, it is a great gain for me that the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, has so much trust in me." And the rapture and happiness never left him for a half month, or his parents for a week. Then that workshop remained 3 whole months with the sky for a roof, and yet no rain came in. Such is the potter Ghatikara. So there was another situation. The Buddha's hut was leaking. There was no grass available. He tried to get grass from potter Ghatikara, but there was no grass available. But obviously the potter Ghatikara has his own house and his own workshop, and there is grass on those roofs as well. And it seems that Ghatikara himself also wasn't home. So the Buddha said to the bhikkhus, "Well, just go and take the grass from his roof. Better that his roof is leaking than my hut." And so obviously Ghatikara's parents first are a little bit suspicious of what's going on here. And they're also blind, so they can't see what's going on. And but obviously, when they hear that it's the bhikkhus taking grass for the Buddha, they're really very, very happy and overjoyed to offer that, even though that means that obviously their own roof will now have a big hole. It's also, just as a little comment on the side, it's also very interesting that they address the parents as sister, which means that they are talking to the mother of Ghatikara, not to the father. Even though the text says they're talking to the parents, which might mean that in that household, the mother was maybe the one who was kind of making a few decisions and was kind of having this conversation with them. So it's interesting that sometimes also women were the heads of households. We have that in quite a few suttas where we see that it's actually not the man, but the woman who is the head of the household. So anyway, they offer the grass to Kassapa Buddha, and when Potter comes home and sees that the roof has been removed from his workshop, he is not in any way annoyed. He is overjoyed that the Buddha didn't even feel any need to ask first, but the Buddha just came and took stuff. And he feels that this is a sign of having really a lot of trust in the Potter, that the Buddha knows, again, that the Buddha knows that the Potter is so generous that he definitely wouldn't get angry, he wouldn't mind in any way, and that anybody, like the Sangha, can take anything from his house without any restriction, and the Potter will just be happy and will just give it. So again, we can reflect what would happen if we came home and half of our roof is missing from our house. And then we hear that, well, the nearest monastery had a problem with their roof and they just came and took ours. without even asking, would we be overjoyed and so happy that bliss doesn't leave us for 2 weeks? Or would we feel that maybe this was a bit overstepping what is proper to do? So are we as generous as Ghatikara the potter, or is there maybe still some reluctance in our mind? And we also see the workshop remained 3 whole months without a roof. With the sky for a roof means without a roof. And still it didn't rain in. So that means Ghatikara had a huge amount of merits and the Devas protected him. And then King Kiki answers, it is a gain for the potter Ghatikara. It is a great gain for him that the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, relies on him thus. So now even the king praises the potter. So hopefully the king was a little bit reconciled. And maybe the king even understood that there are things that are more important than just having all those luxuries and having all this power and money, and that actual practice is more praiseworthy than being the king of such a luxury realm. So then King Kiki of Kasi dispatched to the potter Ghatikara 500 cartloads of red rice stored in the sheaf and also source materials to go with it. Then the king's men went to the potter Ghatikara and told him, Venerable Sir, there are 500 cartloads of red rice stored in the sheaf and also source materials to go with it, dispatched to you by King Kiki of Kasi. Please accept them. The king is very busy and has much to do. I have enough. Let this be for the king himself. So now the king tries to at least make a little bit of merit and donate a huge amount of food to Ghatikara, so that Ghatikara is well supported and his family is well supported, and probably also so that Ghatikara can support the Sangha. So King Kiki, as we remember, he wanted to make merit by offering a rains residence and food for the Sangha for 3 months. Since that didn't work out, now he's trying to give it to Ghatikara, so Ghatikara can be supported and can support the Sangha. And he's still offering all these luxury foods, red rice stored in the sheaf. That was pretty fancy rice. And then source materials to go with it probably means also very fancy kind of stuff. But Ghatikara is, as we have already seen, lives a very, very simple life with very few material possessions. He doesn't want to have all this fancy stuff. He doesn't want to store that many material possessions. He doesn't want to be burdened by all this heap of stuff. He doesn't want to look after it. He understands that all these material possessions are just a burden. They are not actually, don't bring the pleasure that we think that is associated with it. So he doesn't accept all these luxury items and he wants to keep on living his very simple life. So then back to Gautama Buddha's time now, and the Buddha, our Buddha, Gautama Buddha, finishes this story by talking to Ananda. And he says to Ananda, now Ananda, you may think thus, certainly someone else was the Brahmin student Jyotipala on that occasion, but it should not be regarded thus. I was the Brahmin student Jyotipala on that occasion. That is what the Blessed One said. The Venerable Ananda was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So we remember the Brahmin student Jyotipala, who was Ghatikara's friend, who became a monk, the story that we read last time. And now the Buddha says, actually, that was my previous rebirth. I was that Brahmin student in that life, and I became that monk under Kassapa Buddha. So the Buddha makes this into a Jataka tale. A Jataka means a previous birth story of the Buddha. So we have a huge collection of Jatakas in the Pali Canon and even larger collection of Jatakas in other Buddhist schools. So people in later Buddhist times were quite fascinated with the idea of exploring the previous births of Gautama Buddha, all the rebirths that he had before and the kind of experiences that he made there. And so these kind of stories are called Jatakas. And we have a few of those in the early Buddhist texts, in the sutras or suttas. And here, this is one, and the Buddha says, well, I was Jyotipala. And obviously that means that Jyotipala, even though he was so inspired and even though he went forth and became a monk, did not get enlightened in Kassapa Buddha's time, because otherwise he would not have been around anymore and could not have become Gautama Buddha. So that was the Ghatikara Sutta. I hope you liked it. I hope you got some inspiration. We can put this into practice a little bit, maybe, at least. Try to become a little bit more like Ghatikara and implement all the practices that he did, and hopefully also become non-returners in this life. And for now, I think we can finish the Sutta class for today. And if there are any questions or comments, please put them in the live chat, and I will see if I can answer them. So let me have a look. Many people are sending lots of emojis, so I am assuming that you all liked Ghatikara's story. And then there is one comment or question, let's see, with the second half of it missing. And Martin says, should I go to a monastery or stay with my family is a difficult question. It seems that the pot maker in this sutta did the right thing. He stayed in the family, he stuck with his profession. Thereby he reached all the perfections one can reach. He became at least a non-returner. No? So what's the message here? Isn't it sometimes the best to stay a layman? Sometimes the monks say, if you're not interested in full enlightenment, you can stay with your job and family. But here it seems that. And then the second half of this comment is still missing, but we can talk about the first half first. So the first thing to notice about the message here is he wanted to become a monk, but it wasn't possible. So he arranged his lifestyle to be as close as possible to that of a monk. And obviously that you can do that as a layperson, and if you can do that, that's great. Most people find it very difficult to do that in lay life. Most people find it very difficult to have, for example, to consistently keep the 5 precepts, to have enough time for practice, to eat 1 meal a day, to observe celibacy, especially if you're living with a partner. Observing celibacy definitely needs a commitment from both people. And then we see how cautious he was in his profession not to cause any kind of harm, even to the smallest beings, by digging up clay from the ground. So he only took what was safe to take without harming any kind of being. He didn't engage in any kind of economic activity. He was very careful not to get involved in anything that has to do with the sensual realm. And I think that was very difficult even back then, but he kind of made it work. Nowadays, it's even more difficult, as I mentioned, to live without money. So yeah, you can do that in life, certainly, but it does need a huge amount of commitment, and you don't have the support that you have if you live with a sangha in a monastery. So in a monastery, the whole monastery is set up to be good for practice, where everybody keeps the same rules, where there is a schedule that even if you don't feel like practicing, you kind of have to practice, because you have to come to the group meditation sittings, you have to come to the chantings, you have to give your dana service, do some kind of work in the monastery, make merit, and just you're constantly surrounded by dharma activities. Whereas in lay life, there's so many distractions, it's really difficult. So the internal strength that you need in order to make progress is much more in lay life, especially if you want to get that far. And then you also said he reached all the perfections one can reach. He became a non-returner. So being a non-returner doesn't mean that he reached all the perfections that one can reach, because he did not become an arahant. So actually it's not possible for lay people to become arahants and then keep on living as lay people. So there is like a small kind of distinction, because you can get very far as a lay person, but you can't go quite to the end. So it seems that Martin is not planning to post the second half of his comment. So I guess that's all. And yeah, I hope that answered the comment or the question. And then Piyal and Indira ask, was Ghaṭikāra a once returner in that life at the end? So he came to human world as Gautama Buddha. Well, there are different theories about that. I guess you're familiar with people having various theories about that. Some people say that maybe he was a once returner, he came back once to this life and then had his final life as Gautama Buddha. Other people say it's very unlikely that he had any kind of attainments, because Gautama Buddha himself stated quite a few times that he didn't have a teacher and that he discovered the path on his own. So obviously, if he already had been a stream enterer or a once returner, that means he was already very strongly fixed on the Noble Eightfold Path. As I mentioned in the beginning, once you become a stream enterer, you're fixed on the Eightfold Path. You're guaranteed to reach Nibbana. You're not going to lose this Dhamma any time again. So you can't really say that you didn't have a teacher, because obviously in that case, Kassapa Buddha would have put him on the path. So most people consider it a lot more likely that Ghaṭikāra didn't have any kind of attainments. Also, just to clarify this last bit, where the Buddha makes this into a Jataka and says he was like Ghaṭikāra was a previous rebirth of his, that part is potentially a little bit late, because if we compare this with the parallels, there is a lot of variance there. Some of the parallels don't have that statement at all. Some of parallels have the statement in a different way. So I think that particular part of the story isn't all that reliable. And of course, people have different theories. My personal opinion is that probably he did not have a noble attainment. So Martin has another question, and he says, you say he wanted to become a monk, but it was not possible. But who says it wasn't possible? The potmaker could have said goodbye to the parents. No, it is said that the Buddha even left his son Rahula. Why did the potmaker stay? He did it for metta reasons, for dana reasons. No, I think we must appreciate this. Often it is said when people still stay with the family job, it is attachment, but sometimes it's not attachment. It is more noble reasons. Wouldn't you agree here? So I think Ghatikara himself in the sutta says that he wants to become a monk, but he can't. That is the part that we read last time. So maybe you remember Ghaṭikāra decided to become a monk, and he asked Ghatikara why Ghatikara didn't ordain. And Ghatikara says that he has to support his blind and aged parents. So that is his reason why he doesn't become a monk, because he has to support the parents that are blind. So as I mentioned, obviously that is out of gratitude for the parents, out of compassion for the parents. I didn't say that this is out of attachment. He can't do this out of attachment because he is a non-returner. He is not attached to anything in the material world. That includes parents. So very clearly he didn't do it out of attachment. He did it out of compassion and out of gratitude. So I agree, obviously, sometimes there can be more noble reasons. But also we see that Ghatikara already led his life in a way that was very similar to a monk's life. Whereas sometimes in modern times, people don't become monastics because of attachment for the families. I mean, that also happens. I mean, very clearly, most lay people still have attachment to their families. Even most monastics still have attachment to their families. Because if you're not a non-returner, you still have attachment to the material world, and that probably includes your family. So that's quite normal, but it's something that we practice with, and we have to understand eventually this is something that we need to let go in order to make progress on the path and in order to become non-returners. It's not even necessary to let this go in order to become stream enterers or once returners, but it is eventually necessary in order to reach the higher stages on the path. So it's not it's not bad if you have attachment to your parents, but obviously we all have to understand that any kind of attachment eventually needs to be let go of. So that was the last question or comment for today, I think, and also it's already 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock over here where I am, and so we will finish for today with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So have a good rest of the day, have a good week, and I will see you all next Tuesday. Take care.